Today, I am speaking with Natalie Lue. Natalie is a writer, speaker, podcaster, and founder of one of the longest running self help blogs in the world, Baggage Reclaim. She helps people understand how their emotional baggage is interfering with their ability to live lives happily and authentically. Today, we had the best conversation about her newest book, The Joy of Saying No. Natalie has identified 5 people-pleasing styles. I'm sure after listening, you'll be able to identify the one or more ways you exhibit people-pleasing behaviors in your life. Ultimately, it's about us becoming aware of when we are saying yes instead of no, and then taking steps to be more aligned with what we truly want and desire. Natalie offers a plan, steps we can all take to stop people-pleasing, reclaim boundaries, and say yes to the life we want. Enjoy. We tackle the big questions, not shying away from the complex, the messy, the awkward, and the joyful parts of relationships. Welcome to Let's Talk Love. Today, I am joined by our guest, Natalie Lue, all the way from the UK. Thank you for joining us, Natalie.
Thank you for having me, Robin.
I've been looking forward to talking to you, Natalie, because I've been preparing for our conversation with my best friend Kirsten. And we have so much fun talking about the books we've read and what we learn personally and relating our own stories. And the book we're going to talk about today that you've written with a lot of, anyways, it's called The Joy of Saying No. A simple plan to stop people pleasing, reclaim boundaries, and say yes to the life you want. Have you been receiving a lot of excellent feedback about your book, Natalie?
I have been, which is always a lovely feeling. It's amazing when people are like, oh my God, I saw myself so clearly,
Yes.
like on those pages. Like, how did you manage to capture that? And it's been amazing to hear how the book has impacted people.
I think it's fantastic, and you give some really good examples that you're like, oh yeah, that's me, or I know that person in my life, that's them. And but all in all, what I think I learned is, and we'll go through the five ways that people pleasing shows up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I learned around this is like we're all doing the same thing, right? It doesn't like, your tactic, your way of doing it is different, but the
Mm-hmm.
end result is people pleasing, right?
Yeah, this is
We just go about it in
exactly.
different ways.
Yeah, and this is exactly what I wanted to get at because I found that people were often mischaracterizing people pleasing, either seeing it as, oh my God, like people pleasing means like you're such a doormat, or that, people pleasing is a sign of virtue. It's a sign of what an
Right.
amazing person I am, my virtuous qualities. And, or even that it's like, oh, well, only some people please. And like, I don't have a problem with people pleasing. And actually, we all have it to some degree. And,
Yes.
but we're motivated by different things. Like some people pleasers are motivated
Mhm.
by being good, for instance. And some people are very, very driven by the sense of being needed. And unless you get a sense of what it is that drives you, what tends to show up for you, then sort of generalizing about yourself or mischaracterizing yourself is only just going to lead to you recreating the same problems again and again.
Right. So tell us how you ended up understanding so much about people pleasing and how you ended up writing this book. Like, tell us a little bit of history because you do share your story in your book, which is great, and how you got there. But I would love it for our listeners to hear.
Was a lifelong people pleaser. I mean, I am. I would call myself a recovering people pleaser now because I'm aware of it and I have been going out of my way to break out of the habit over the last sort of 18 years. But people pleasing was as natural to me as breathing. Um, I learned really from the get go, I picked up this message that it was really important for me to be good. And there were demands on me at times for me to be perfect, that I had to be better. And I was repeatedly received messaging about how I needed to make the most amount of effort, the best effort. And I,
And this
like
is, sorry, just to interrupt you for a second, Natalie. This is when you were growing up. Like this is part of your
yeah,
childhood, right?
it's just
Which,
part of my
yes,
childhood.
okay.
And
Yeah.
so, I was this little girl whose parents had broken up pretty young, and who had the sense of being really responsible from a very young age. I felt responsible for, in some way, for my parents no longer being together. I felt responsible for my younger brother then. I only had one at that time. I felt responsible for my mother's happiness. I had the sense
Mhm.
that it was important not to make her feel bad because I still love my father. I felt it was important to try to be good so that my father would visit, so that he would turn up on time, so that he would be there. And it just starts rolling on and on. And obviously, this is a kid who is internalizing experiences and making decisions that basically say, I'm not really very good. Like, I'm not good enough and I need to try harder. My mother often seems
Mm.
so unhappy, particularly with me. And of course, this is from a child's perspective, but this set the foundation for people pleasing because I grew up to be somebody who did not like myself. In fact, who I would say hated myself. I had a pattern really from the get-go, my teenage years, of being involved with emotionally unavailable, sometimes shady boys, and it later becoming emotionally unavailable and shady men. I've only ever had
Yes.
one healthy romantic relationship, which is with my now husband, who, we've been together for almost 18 years. And um, what I experienced in childhood, I experienced emotional, verbal, sometimes physical abuse. I was constantly anxious as a child. And
Hmm.
I didn't realize how much of that drove my behavior and choices, that I was always about effort and wanting to be a light and avoiding being rejected and just wanting to keep myself safe, which is how so many of us go about life. And so
Yes.
me, me doing all of this stuff, the chasing after the wrong men, staying in, very unhealthy relationships, eventually led to, aside from my self-esteem plummeting, I ended up being very unwell with an immune system disease called sarcoidosis, which I wasn't diagnosed with until early 2004, but I'd say I started experiencing the symptoms in 2003, but it had probably been around for a bit. My body had basically shut down and was kind of attacking itself. So started
Right.
losing the sight in my left eye. I had problems with my spleen, with my lungs. There were lumps throughout my body. I was struggling to breathe, struggling to walk. It was just horrendous. What was I doing? I was having an affair with a coworker.
Mhm.
That was my biggest priority, trying to win him over, trying to get him to leave his girlfriend. And it really took my health being at rock bottom and being told, if you don't go on steroids now, or again, but this time for life, that you're going to be dead by 40. Something in that conversation jolted me out of this people pleasing coma that I had been in for 28 years at that point. And what was fortunate, I think, about that was that at the time I'd been writing. I'd had a personal blog. I think I'd had a personal blog for about a year or so. No, 2 years at that point. And when I spoke out loud on that blog, and that blog used to be called Tired of Men and other things that drive a 20 something around the twist. And I was talking about like just, you know, commuting into London and the frustrations of dating men and you saying that you want to be, in a relationship, but you're always bored by the nice guys type of thing. And I was talking about my life. So I just, casually mentioned, oh, I seem to have a penchant for emotionally unavailable men who tend to be mommy's boys. And that I actually don't like myself. And I poured all this out. And I thought I was weird. And all of these people were like, you're describing me. This is
Me too,
exactly how I
right?
feel.
Like that's what people are saying. I relate
Yeah.
to that. That's my
Yeah.
situation as well. Yeah.
And I'm not going, well, this is a little bit weird because I always thought that I was a weirdo and unlovable. Look at all these people who are saying, I'm grappling with this stuff too. I've been doing the same stuff as you. And that prompted me to start writing Baggage Reclaim, a blog that I started in
Mhm.
September 2005, really as a way to explore the complexities of trying to forge intimate relationships when you are terrified of abandonment, when you are a people pleaser and a perfectionist and overgiver and all the things. And at the same time, before starting that, I'd also told that doctor who said I need to go on steroids for life. I told him no. I said, no, I need more time. I need to explore my other options. He thought I was crazy. But I did go into remission 8 months later. And that was through, I really genuinely believe that behind every issue that we're coming up against in life, something in amongst all of that requires us to figure out where we need to say no so that we can figure out what we need to say yes to. Any troubles we're coming up against has got a
Right.
boundary issue in there somewhere. And when I said no that day in the doctor's office, and that I started choosing myself. And when I decided to prioritize myself, to prioritize my health, to invest in myself, to explore other options, when I then heard about the word boundaries, I didn't have any information about boundaries. All I knew was that I had to figure out how to start saying no and expressing my limits and also being more truthful about who I am and what I need, want, expect, feel, and think. And essentially, what I've been doing for, I suppose, over 18 years through the blog on Baggage Reclaim and then through the podcast and through my books and so forth is basically it's a little bit like being a crash test dummy and living my life out loud and sharing with people the another way to be, how to break the cycle of people pleasing so that we can reclaim ourselves, from this emotional baggage and move forward with love, care, trust, and respect.
Yes. I think what you're saying is you have to get to a place of being brutally honest with yourself,
Mm,
right? Because
mm-hmm.
it's like, and that takes effort and consciousness to actually get to know yourself, right? Like that would be like, so it's obviously these two things go hand in hand
Yeah.
rather than looking outside yourself for how can I manipulate this situation to be accepted or loved,
Amen.
right? Which is really what that is. It's like you need to understand what are your true needs, what are your
Mm-hmm.
true desires, um,
And you're
because
not
you
going to
say
find
people
that by
pleasing.
pleasing people. Oh, sorry.
No, no, you're not. You're absolutely not. You say people pleasing is consciously and unconsciously suppressing and repressing your needs, your desires, your expectations, your feelings, your opinions to put other people first so that you gain attention, affection, approval, love, validation, avoid conflict, all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us, and I really like, you go into how, our generation, not our children, how we're raising our children, because it's
Mm-hmm.
different, but our generation, we were raised in what you call the age of obedience. Makes
Yeah.
perfect sense to me. I mean, a lot of us were raised as like, do as I say, not as I do. Don't question me. Like I remember, like we've all heard this from our parents, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
46, and I
Yeah,
can
you're the
relate
same
to it. Like all
age.
my cousins, all my friends. Are we the same age?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly
but
the same age.
I remember like as a little girl saying to my parents, well, as I was even a teenager, whatever. Like my parents would say no, and you're like, why? Can you please explain to me why you're saying no right now? Right? You just want to know the why, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, because I said so,
Yeah.
right? Like there's
Yeah.
nothing, there's no other explanation. Like you just accept it and that is it. So so
Yeah.
you talk about the age of obedience and how it's it's not about having your voice is definitely not being heard. You're not even allowed to be heard. And it's like, be
It's,
quiet. Shh, shut your mouth.
yeah. It's like, I'll give you something to cry about, and they're like,
Right.
you asking why is like, that's back chat. You're being disrespectful. It's, do as I
Yes.
say, not as I do, you know, obey me unquestionably. And look, our parents, grandparents, and ancestors before us, they were all also raised in the age of obedience as
Yes,
well.
yes. This
You
is
know,
not, I'm not here to blame. This is not a blame game at all, but it's just
exactly,
understanding
exactly.
where
And
this comes from.
I felt it was so important for us to recognize that for hundreds of years we have been in this age of obedience. And how could we possibly expect to wake up as grown ass adults who, after spending their entire childhoods being told that you must obey authorities, don't question them, you got to trust unquestionably, I don't know, people from church
Right.
or extended family or friends or whoever it is, and just do as you're told, and that the most important thing for you to do and be is to be compliant. How can we possibly expect that we're just going to wake up in adulthood and be like, oh yeah, like I'm just totally fine with turning around and saying no? Of
Oh
course we're
my
not.
gosh. No, and you make such a good point, Natalie. I think about how I have had to relearn, like learn this very valuable lesson around that because that's dangerous. You can't just assume that somebody that's older than you in a position of power that you just have to automatically trust. Trust is earned. And I sure as hell didn't know what, and it's like, for instance, it guides so much of how, like, you have to protect yourself, protect your heart, protect yourself. And that's boundaries, all this stuff. But I think about when I was dating in my younger years, and I know a lot of people can relate to this, and you can too. You talked about how you weren't in healthy relationships until you met your husband. And it's like you're dating somebody, that person, you have to get to know that person over a very long period of time so that you can trust them. It's not just an
Yeah.
automatic thing, but we're taught as little ones to trust people automatically. So that's a seriously dangerous thing. For example,
Well, totally. And the thing is, and I say this in the book, when we're children, an authority is anyone who we perceive to have power over us. Yeah. So
yeah,
that is often grown ups. And there was this sense that any grown up who presented themselves in our life was like, oh, well, you just got to do as you're told. That means that the stranger who tells you to, hey, get into my car or whatever, you're getting conflicting messages from people. And of course, look, the way
right,
that we were taught to be was how our parents, grandparents, and so forth had learned to survive. But of course, society has evolved, and we're also seeing the outcome of all of this. And this
right,
sense that what happens is when we're adults, that same feeling of, oh, that person is an authority, even though they're not, will bring out the same compliance in us. And we are also, you and I have already said we're the same age. We grew up in a time where people would be like, "Oh my god, like he or she, they're so popular, and they go to church, and they work as a teacher, or they do this, or they do that." And so it was almost like, well, then that's it. That's all you need to know. Off you pop. Have a nice life with that person, and then you get into a relationship with this person, and they'll be like, "What the hell's going on?" And in your head, you're going, "Yeah, but they're popular and they're good looking and they have a really good job and they earn really good money." I mean, I always I've come back to this often in the trailer for, I can't even remember what it's called, the Ted Bundy Files on Netflix. In the
oh boy,
trailer, there's a clip of a woman who says something along the lines of, "He's good looking, he's intelligent, he's something else. Are you sure you've got the right guy?" Like, it's like, how could he possibly
right,
be a serial killer? That
right. Oh my
explains a
God,
lot of why we struggle to say no and why we struggle to recognize when we are in an unhealthy situation or even when we're in danger, because we've been given very, very confusing messages about when to say yes and when to say no. We're told no is a dirty word, and you
Mm.
need to comply, but also, like, be afraid of strangers, but also don't embarrass me, and don't be a slut, and don't be this, and don't. It's exhausting, it's tedious. It's no wonder we've grown up anxious, confused, resentful, frustrated, all sorts of things.
Yeah. So let's go through the five people pleasing styles because I was like, and I really like the stories you share just to give an idea about behaviors and how that they show up. So the
Yeah.
first one is the first one is gooding. And I can relate to
Yeah.
this. You be a
Yeah.
good girl. Like just be good, right? Because that is going to, in all those ways that you're good, you're going to get more love. You're going to, you know, well, you'll have more safety. You'll have more. So let's
Exactly.
talk about gooding and how gooding shows up as in people pleasing.
You know, the people pleasing styles are about not just how we go about people pleasing, but what's also driving us. And so somebody who has the gooding
Right.
style is very driven by this, by wanting to be liked and wanting to be
Yeah.
perceived as
Accepted.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have an idea, which it may have come from their upbringing or from an amalgamation of things. This is what it means to be a good person, a good something. So a good employee, a good parent, a good Christian, a good partner, whatever it is. And they really try to present as that thing, even if they're doing something sometimes different from what they're presenting, or they hold themselves very rigidly to the standard. And the idea is, well, I'm being good and I'm being well intentioned. So why would anybody take issue with this? I'm following the rules of life, and that means that if you're trying to be a good
Right.
person, it's because you're afraid of being a bad person. Let's be real.
Oh,
And
oh,
so,
absolutely. So Natalie, I really related to this one because I was raised Catholic and, we went to church every Sunday, most Sundays, and I really struggle with this to this day because I want to be the most loving,
yeah,
caring, generous, all of those things, person I can be. Like I strive to be that.
yeah,
And I find myself tripping up still to this day about like thinking to myself, and it's like this self-critical voice, like, Robin, are you being good? Are you being the most loving human being you can be? But if you're doing that at the cost of your own self,
yeah.
that's right. Um,
I
you
totally
have to
relate to
really
that.
differentiate. You have to differentiate between is this in my best interest? Right? It's like it's
Mhm.
kind of it can be very confusing if you
Well,
look at it from the religious, not the religious, but just like this altruistic place.
absolutely. I mean, even though I'm not Catholic, I essentially had a Catholic upbringing. I was brought up in one of the most Catholic places on earth, Ireland. And it's
Yes.
the
Oh yeah.
guilt is bred into you. It's bred into you to feel
Yes.
guilty. I went to school with nuns walking around. And even
Yes.
though I wasn't Catholic, I had the Catholic upbringing. I did all the classes. I went to church, all the rest, even though I was technically, Protestant, Church of Ireland or Church of England. And what was fascinating was to acknowledge, it was only really when I got into my 30s when I was like, geez, I would sometimes hear certain things that sort of pass, or would feel stressed out about certain things. And I was like, oh my God, like that is the guilt. Because Catholicism has a lot of guilt around religion, full stop. But there tends to be a lot of guilt. And there's this fear of being like this bad person. Are you a good girl? Are you a good? And also,
Oh
there's a lot of
yes.
sense, I think, particularly when we start talking about religion, this fear of being selfish. And, it's like, well, what's good for everybody is good for you, which we know that that is not always the case. And so we can feel quite conflicted, with this fear of being a bad person, fear of going to hell. There's all sorts of things that we can be worried about, depending on what we've internalized through our religious upbringing. So I totally relate to that.
Yeah. Okay. So I related to gooding for sure.
Yeah.
I'm a recovering gooder, but I'm still like, I really just want to be a good person. But like, I think I can't do that at the cost of myself,
Yeah.
that's what we're getting to here.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think
So then
it's,
you've got efforting.
yeah. And actually, just before we go to everything, I want to add, you know, what happens with Gooding and really with any of the styles, but particularly with Gooding, is you're performing at your idea of being a good person. And so what happens is that it can put you at conflict with who you actually are, because your idea of that and then your actual needs might be at odds with each other. And so you start to go
Right.
against yourself at times. And that's where, as you say, the compromising of yourself, the hurting of yourself comes in.
And it makes sense to me, Natalie, that you know, you share, you just did around how you ended up having this chronic illness,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like when you are continually sacrificing what you need in yourself, you're
Mhm.
hurting yourself over and
Yeah,
over repeatedly. And how is that going to manifest? It's going to manifest in resentment, anger, illness. I mean, all this makes sense
totally.
to me, right? Because you are
Totally.
constantly compromising what you actually need to be healthy within, like, holistically.
Yeah, all people pleasing puts you at odds with yourself. You are not telling your
Yes,
mind
yes.
and body the truth. You're saying one thing on the outside or doing something on the outside and feeling, thinking, basically being another thing on the inside, smiling on the outside, fuming, crying, whatever it is on the inside. And that is
Right.
a problem because if we don't pay attention, eventually our body will go, fine, I'll make you pay attention.
Oh, exactly. Okay. So efforting. You say you were definitely efforting. And
Yeah,
I
so
get this. I get
we
what people,
we can
yeah.
dabble across the styles. Some of us are very
Yes, let's do
strongly
it.
one, but for some of us, will tap into a few of them. For me, I'm strongly an efforter. I think there's definitely elements of the others, but efforting is where it's at for me. Somebody who has the efforting style is driven really by this need to try to prove themselves as being
Yeah.
good enough. And it's not enough for them to give the appearance of being good. It's not enough to be like, hey, I'm a good, like, it's effort. It's like, I've got the receipts to prove this. And so they are
Right.
about being the best, doing the best, trying to be perfect, which means that we are also the most likely to burn out because our way of pleasing others is using effort. And what happens is that we end up exploiting ourselves, spreading ourselves thin, and basically eventually burning out. Um, for me, I think because so much of it was like, you've got to try hard. And it's important for me to point out that, and I say this in the book, that culturally as well, you can actually be conditioned as part of, for instance, the immigrant experience, or because you are from
Yes.
some form of diverse minority, struggling background, where it's drummed into you. Listen, you're you're part of being a good person, showing that you are worthy of being here, proving that you're not all the stereotypes that people say about you. You must go you must do 100 times more than everybody else. You must try hard. And that's also a part
Absolutely.
of mine. You got to be the good
Yes.
minority. You can't be, oh, look at the size of you. You must prove that you're not lazy. It's all of this stuff that gets drummed into us. And so it's like, you've got to prove that you are a good citizen and you better go off and get yourself a degree. In African and Caribbean culture, for instance, there is this, like, it used to be, probably still is really, is you need to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant, something where it can go, you're done good. You are not the lazy stereotype. And if you can come back with a few masters, a few MBAs at the same time, all the better. It's
Oh,
like,
for sure.
yeah. And of course, that cuts across lots of
Efforting,
cultures into
efforting is
things.
absolutely drilled through. I interviewed Nicole Walters, I think about 3 weeks ago, and she talks about the same thing. And she said, like, it's that person over there, they're getting a B. You need to get an A+.
Yeah.
You're not, this is just the way it has to be.
Yeah.
And don't you dare come home with any B's in your report card. You have to be an A
Yeah.
student, and you
Yeah. And
have to, like, that's totally expected of you. Yes.
that's my upbringing, like down to a T.
Yeah.
And it's important to as well understand about efforting that, just like with any style, like, we are using people pleasing as a way of gaining self-worth, proving ourselves to be good enough. But
Right.
also with efforting, we use this style of people pleasing to control outcomes. So it's like, well, the more effort I made, the more I've earned the right to have my needs and wants met, or to not be criticized or judged or to be rejected. So of course, we exploit ourselves, and then we still experience rejection and criticism and so forth. And then we're like, oh my God, I'm not good enough. So everything always comes down to, I didn't make enough effort. Like, that is the efforting
Right.
experience. If every
Yeah. So
time
you give
anything
an
goes wrong in
example.
your
Oh,
life,
sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, I was just going to say, if any time anything goes wrong in your life, the first thought is, but I tried so hard. I made so much of an effort. Anything like that, you're an efforter through and through.
Yes. So you give an example in your book about a woman, Angeline,
Mm-hmm.
dating, right? We got to talk about this because
Yeah.
this would show this is how everything would show up in dating. So she goes on, she goes on 3 dates with a man that she's not even too sure about, right? She's like
Mm-hmm.
all the red flags. She's totally dismissing all the red flags, and she overlooked like and so when he backs off, she goes into overdrive, like
Yeah.
more effort. Like she puts on this, like just her sweet face and her positive attitude. And if I do more for this man and show him that actually I'm worth it, like I'm putting a lot of effort here. You better like me. That she's showing, she wants that worthiness from him to be like,
Yeah.
I'm putting all this effort in. Right.
Yeah. And I was so important for me to share that example because I think it describes a lot of people's dating experiences where when they really reflect, they realize I wasn't really even into this person. What happened was the anxiety kicked in. I went into overdrive. I started making a lot of effort because I wanted to prove that I was girlfriend or boyfriend material, that I was worthy of a relationship. And then because I was doing that, I started to feel like, hold on a second, like I'm doing all these things, like where's the relationship? So what's happening is you're going around making all this effort, which then creates the sense of you're owed a relationship. So then you're going harder and harder, ignoring yourself. And then the person isn't interested. And it's like, but hold on a second, I tried so hard. But you don't even realize that what motivates you to go after somebody in the first place isn't interest, it's anxiety.
Yes, but I also think this shows up in so many relationships now, like marriages, right? Long-term
Yeah.
relationships. It's like you're doing the dishes, you're clean, like you're the house cleaner, you're running all of the errands for the kids, you're managing everything. And at the end of the day, you're feeling like your partner is not pulling their weight because you're making all this effort,
Yeah.
right? And then at the end of the day, you're so resentful and angry because
Yeah.
actually it's not, you're not, first of all, you're not boundaried, but you're not being a clear communicator either of your needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're
You're
just
thinking like if
dropping
I
hints.
over effort,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, like you talk about hinting too. So I think efforting can like, oh yeah, it shows up in a lot of different ways for
Yeah.
many people.
You'll know it if you're keeping score in your relationship where it feels like, oh my God, I've got this
Oh
mountain of stuff that
yeah.
I've done. Oh my God, I've done so much. What the hell is she doing? What's he doing? Yeah. Everything.
Yeah. Okay. So then avoiding this one. And so this is like, I just love the fact that you break them down into five parts because we can all see these behaviors in different ways, but it's all people pleasing.
Yeah, avoiding I think is the one that I think has shocked quite a few people because it's so out of
Yes.
view, and it never even occurred to them that it was actually people pleasing. And avoiding as a people pleasing style
Yeah.
is the hiding, blending, merging, basically to avoid conflict of any kind, trying to avoid discomforting others so that of course, they'll accept, love, approve, whatever, but also in the hopes that they're going to meet your needs and wants. And also, it's like, well, hold on a second. I always go along with whatever you want. So why would you criticize me? Why would we ever have a problem? And so
Right.
someone who's listening might recognize themselves in it because, they're the type where it's like, what do you want to do tonight? I want to do what you want to do. Where do you fancy eating? I'm happy to eat wherever you want to eat. So somebody listening might recognize themselves in that. But what has been quite interesting has been to hear from people like, oh my gosh, this is my partner. Like now it's suddenly become like because they would feel so frustrated and resentful. It's like, why are they doing this? Why is it they can't be straight with me? Why is it that then when I try to bring up something, wow, I went along with what you wanted and you were perfectly happy with it then. So it's not my problem if you don't like it now. And it's like, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. So you didn't actually want to do this? And so it's the sense of
Right.
like, I'm going to avoid myself and avoid bringing up anything that is remotely uncomfortable because that's my way of pleasing you. And everybody just like don't like create conflict or criticism. So there'll also be the
Right.
people who there's this big elephant in the room, this big family secret or whatever it might be. Somebody who has the avoiding style will be like, my way of pleasing you is we are just never going to talk about this. And then they're completely confused when somebody's like, this isn't working for me because they're like, Why wouldn't you want somebody who never brings something up with you? Because we want intimacy.
That's right. It's like we this is exactly what you say. You say people pleasing blocks intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think it is very common for in a relationship that some one person like doesn't want conflict. They were raised in a house like when conflict's bad. Like
Yeah,
we don't talk about our problems in front of the kids. We
yeah,
don't have problems, first of
yeah,
all, right? And we're definitely doing it behind closed doors. The kids are raised to believe like actually my parents had the most amazing relationship in the world because they never ever fought. And I'm
yeah.
going, that's not true. Your parents absolutely argued. You just didn't hear it. So they're taught to avoid any sort of hard conversations, any sort of conflict, because they're not taught how to do it in a healthy way. There's no modeling. So you're avoiding all this stuff. Yeah.
Amen. I mean, when people say to me, Natalie, I've been in my relationship for 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 30 years, and we never argue. Uh, that's not a badge of honor. That's a problem. Nobody is
It
happy all the
is.
time. Nobody is agreeing all the
No,
time. Somebody's lying. And there'll be a lot of passive aggression there. Sure, maybe you're never arguing, but what's happening is like sometimes you're getting a bit of weird silent treatment. Sometimes you're getting cut out of things. Sometimes the first time maybe you know that something's up with something is just like when you kind of get like random surprise kind of weird issues kind of coming up, and then they kind of play dumb about the whole thing. It's like, I don't know. But it's always passive aggression. But you can't have intimacy without also having conflict. Not conflict for conflict's sake, but conflict as a way to deepen your understanding of each other. And if you're both presenting as, I never have an issue with you, you're lying. Like that is not intimacy
guaranteed.
at all.
Guaranteed. The other, I think you did bring this up in the book, and if not, it might have been another interview I listened of you was ghosting.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That
Yeah.
is like ghosting is absolutely avoiding
Mm-hmm.
having that hard conversation with somebody. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just like, you know what? I really enjoyed our time together, but you're not for me. Like, you're not my, like,
Yeah.
it's just not going to work for us. But thank you so much. Right. But that
Yeah.
conversation is way too much for an avoider. So they
Yeah.
think that they're actually saving somebody the harm by just like ghosting, but in a way, well, it's definitely passive aggressive. So ghosting, I think, is a complete avoiding. You're kind of right.
Totally. Yeah, and what's
Oh yeah,
interesting as well about ghosting is often in the stories I've heard about ghosting, what makes it so confusing is prior to the ghosting, person was like, yeah, I'm going to call, I'm having a great time. It felt like the best date of their life, that they were having the best time, and then crickets. But it's almost as if that same avoider wanted to give good date and try to create the most positive impression possible. So avoiding having any sort of awkwardness, any difficult conversation, so that then they could be like, right, and I'm out. And then they can kind of
oh
comfort
my
themselves.
gosh,
Well, I gave them a good time.
that is such a good point you make. I never actually, yes, the dynamic is fascinating because oftentimes that's what we hear, right? Around ghosting. It's like the person that got ghosted is absolutely shocked. Like,
Yeah.
how, like, what happened? Like, everything was great. So I never thought about that dynamic, but that's, yeah.
And also, the other
Wow.
reason why people with the avoiding style in particular ghost is because, like any people pleaser, we all have a tipping point, yeah? And so when an avoider has been avoiding and avoiding and avoiding, but they're actually unhappy, they will feel as if, look, I've put up with so much and I've avoided so much. And then they reach a point where it's like, I've had enough. And they are the ones who will
Yes.
cut and run. They will disappear. They will vamoose out of your life. They will cut you off stone cold. And in their mind,
Oh,
it's like,
yeah.
I gave everything to you. I was exactly who I want you to be or who you wanted me to be. And then you basically let me down and I'm out. Because they don't tell the left hand what the right hand is doing. And so the first you know that they're unhappy with you is when they're already gone or when they're blown up at you.
Wow. Wow. That's, I love this. Okay. So then the other one, the next one is savor.
So saving is, I think, the people pleasing style that I think a lot of people find it easy to recognize because they already really identify with the sense of giving and fixing and helping and supporting and rescuing. But somebody who has the saving style of people pleasing does have a need to feel needed. And what you're also seeing is a convergence of both the gooding, so this sort of need to be perceived as being good, as being helping and supportive, but also putting some effort behind it, but directing it towards the whole I've got to be of service to others and sacrificing. And basically, the saving is sacrificing yourself for others in the hope that you will be rewarded, with the attention, affection, approval, like that they won't leave, that they will depend on you. And so actually, when you have that saving, people pleasing style, there is a part of you, and I know it can be uncomfortable to hear, that because you need to feel needed, it means you also need to be around people and in situations that have problems. Because how else are you going to be needed? How are you going to be
Right.
helping and
How else are you
fixing
going
and
to
saving and
save the
rescuing?
day? Like
Yeah,
save the day, right? Like, somebody calls and it's like, there's a fire,
yeah,
I'm not talking about literally a fire, but
yeah.
like, my life just blew up. I need you to save me. Okay. I'm right there. It's just like
Yeah,
Superman, right? Or Superwoman. Like, here we go.
yeah. You're
I think
always
you
the
give the
one that.
example, Natalie, about,
Mm. Oh,
yeah,
sorry, one.
I think you give the example about your dad, right? Was it your dad or was it somebody? I'm sorry. I think maybe it wasn't. I'm
Oh,
sorry, but there was a
oh,
father
well,
who dropped everything for everybody in
yeah.
his life.
That's my
And
dad. Yeah.
actually, okay, this was something that somebody said at your dad's celebration of life, right?
Yes.
At the
Yeah.
end,
He
his
was.
funeral was like, yeah,
He. You're right. They talked about how every story was. He dropped everything. He left his wife, so my stepmother and kids, my sisters, in the middle of the night to go and do this stuff for others. And I remember the priest, the reverend, being like, "You could have just got AA, I don't know if you might call it AAA out there, but the Automobile Association. Like, why are you calling them up to
yes,
come and fix
yeah,
your car at 2 o'clock in the morning when you could call the AA?" So it was all, and myself, and my brother were having breakfast the day after the funeral, and I was like, "Oh my god, if Dad just helped even like one less person, he might have had the ability to be more involved in our lives. He might have actually had something to
isn't
give
that interesting,
to
right? Because he
us."
was a saver
Yeah,
and he sacrificed his relationship with his own family to be that saver in his life in other people's lives. Wow.
yeah. And
Hmm.
it's pretty messed up when you're
Yeah.
watching somebody running around being Superman to everybody else, and you're going, hello, like you're neglecting your own kids. And I'm seeing you running
Wow.
around and doing all this stuff. So it feeds into this sense of unwariness. I think it's also important as well to recognize as part of the saving that of all people pleasers have this sense of being well intentioned. But I think that
Yes.
saving in particular, when people recognize themselves in it, it feels uncomfortable because there's a part of them going, but how can it be bad to help or to give? But you're giving and you're helping and you're doing all of this stuff without boundaries. And also on some level, because it is a way of being in control. I'm not saying that you're a controlling person, but you use these as a way to kind of be in charge of situations, making yourself feel needed and purposeful. And what can be difficult for people who have the saving style is that when they experience criticism or when people don't want the help or support or they overstep, they're like, but I was just trying to help. I was just, I was being well intentioned. I'm just being giving. Oh my God, how could anybody take issue with that? But sometimes you're overstepping boundaries. And a particular area of this, let's speak to romantic relationships, is the fixer uppers, rescuing romantic partners,
Mm.
deliberately being involved with people because you see them as a fixer upper project. And because on some
Mm.
level, you seeing yourself as being in charge in the relationship, as sort of stepping in, you think that this person will not have a reason to leave because they are dependent on you. And also because you are giving them so much more than what you perceive anybody else to have done, what they could do for themselves. It's like, well, why would they leave? And then when they skip off down the road to somebody else, it's like, It
I
kills
did so
us.
much. I was just such a, yes, yeah, yeah.
And it's the
Okay. The
unsolicited as
last one is,
well.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just
Yes,
going to say it's
yes.
the unsolicited as well. Like that, you have to be boundaried around help. If you're doing it because on some level you feel unworthy because you have to, because you have a hidden agenda, it's a problem.
It is. Okay. The last one is sufferer.
Yeah. So when you have the suffering style of people pleasing, a part of you believes that the more you suffer, the better it makes you as like the gooder you are, the better a person you are. So it's like I
Yeah.
bleed for you. And how this then manifests is that because you are driven by an almost need to feel bad, to need to be seen as suffering, you are not going to place yourself in a situation where it doesn't fit that. And so what happens is you are then involved with people who repeatedly overstep your boundaries. You can end up putting yourself in acute need because you're trying to call attention to a need. It's like, look at me suffering. Oh my gosh, I've let you trash my boundaries. I've let you treat me terribly. Now will you give me a relationship? Now will you love me? Because look how much I've been willing to suffer for you. And so they are often the
Right.
scapegoat, for instance, in their family dynamics. They can find themselves being, at best, taken advantage of, at worst, abused. And they're in this identity of suffering. And they think, look, how much I'm pleasing you by suffering, not realizing that actually it's just adding more and more to their own pain. And it's like they think there's a tipping point of suffering where finally they will be recognized and they will be seen as worthy and good enough. They also hope, and this is really the case with all people pleasing, but particularly with suffering, that the person will recognize how badly they are behaving, how they're not, it's not an equitable relationship, how our needs are not being met. And they were like, oh, I feel so bad about this. Finally, let me meet your needs now and give you what you want. And instead,
Right.
they keep suffering. And often when you were at the suffering style, you've had the others, but you've essentially fallen on your sword and got into a really sort of tricky spot where it's like, this is just the only way for me to be. And as I said, if you identify with suffering, it's not going to feel comfortable for you to be in a situation where you're not. And so it becomes sort of self-fulfilling because you're going to be drawn to people and situations that let you fit that identity of suffering. And if you're the scapegoat, you'll be with somebody who never takes responsibility and always wants to dump on you. And when you can realize, oh my gosh, like, for instance, you might be trying to please the parent who always scapegoated you, who never sort of recognized you, and that you're still doing that through these relationships and it's become an identity. You can be like, oh my gosh, I do not need to sacrifice myself in this way anymore.
No, no. So this is, you've got such a, like, there's so much of your book is about
Mm.
reclaiming yourself, getting to know yourself. And you've got ways you do that, right? So, man, we don't have a lot of time left because we've got to go through the tools, Natalie. How do we overcome people pleasing? It doesn't happen overnight. That's an
No.
actually really good lesson that you teach. It's like you've got to start small, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it starts by understanding, like, building boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and saying no, like doing an audit of your life of like, where are you compromising yourself, your needs, your desires?
Yeah.
Um,
And
and then how do you start small? Give us examples.
so, the first step is really to get to know your pleasing. So, you know, you can't change something that you don't know. So you need to spend some time just observing without judgment where your pleasing is showing up. And the best way to do that
Right.
is to recognize where what I call the people pleaser feelings are showing up: anxiety, resentment, frustration, overwhelm, irritation, feeling helpless, powerless, overwhelmed, overloaded, or even feeling low, depressed. That is your body's way of letting you know that you've either said yes to something for the wrong reasons, i.e., people pleasing, or that you have said yes to something that technically you want to do, that it's okay to do, but your approach is how you're going about people pleasing. So you're really not taking good care of yourself. If you can notice What do you say
Mhm.
yes, no, and maybe to in your life? You can start to see, oh, this is where my people pleasing is showing up. This is the person, the thing that sets that off. It's easy to assume, oh, I just people please everywhere. No, you might find that actually when it comes to your friends, you're okay. But when it comes to work or with romantic partners or with family, it's like, oh my, the wheels come off. You're not going to know this
That's where it's
unless you
showing
take some
up.
time
Right.
to observe. The next thing then is to really, I talk about, you know, recognizing your baggage. So, look, it's not that people don't get on our nerves, that they don't take liberties, that basically that people haven't done us wrong at times. However, we wouldn't react the way that we do. We wouldn't feel about it the way that we do. We wouldn't avoid saying no, being honest about who we are, expressing our limits if we didn't have some baggage behind that type of situation. So it's not that they're not annoying or whatever it is, but what's the baggage behind it? Where else have you felt, fought, and acted similarly? So when you notice that something has really unsettled you or you've been triggered into the people pleasing, it's like, pause. What's the baggage behind this? Where else have I felt, fought, and acted similarly? Who or what does this remind me of? And the best example that I always give of this is that people will be sharing stories with me. Oh my gosh, this person, I feel so like afraid around them, all this type of thing. Where else have you felt, fought, and acted similarly? Who or what does this remind you of? And then they go, oh my God, this person reminds me of my sister, my dad, my mother, my old school bully, whoever it is. But suddenly the lights go on. And it's like, oh, that's what's going on. Because then you can stop tricking yourself into believing, oh, I have to do things this way. Like you can recognize your baggage is showing up. Like we all have emotional baggage. That's why we're not saying no in the first place. The next thing then
Right.
that we can do from there is we can start to reparent ourselves. So, people pleasing is a childhood habit. It's a childlike response. And it's a maladaptive one. So it helped us to
Right.
survive our childhood, but we were not supposed to continue with it into adulthood. And we are not going to be
Right.
able to reclaim ourselves from our emotional baggage and become more of who we really are if we are still behaving like a child in our life. And so
Yes.
when we can reparent ourselves, it's like recognizing, hold on, we are our primary caregiver. And when we are avoiding saying no, avoiding expressing our limits and being honest about who we are, we're acting as if everybody's mommy and daddy or old school bully or whoever it might be. And we're forgetting that we're a grown up now and that we have agency. And as you said, it's not an overnight thing, it's a gradual thing. It's not that we don't have parents or other loved ones in our lives, but we are our primary caregiver. And we have got to stop acting as if, well, I can just decimate my needs, desires, expectations, feelings, and opinions, sacrifice myself, and that somehow in the mix of this, I'm going to be taken care of. No, it's our job to take care of ourselves. Not in isolation, but if we're not taking care of ourselves, we cannot interact in our relationships in a way that allows them to take care of us too. And then what's next after that? Then we go on to hinting. No, make it a desire or say no. So, very quickly, what that means is, for a lot of people pleasers, we don't realize that a lot of what we do is driven by anxiety. We're not saying yes because we want to, or even because we genuinely need to, but because we're afraid of what will happen if we don't. So, it's really about
Right.
anxiety and a sense of obligation.
Fear.
And yeah, exactly, this
Yeah.
fear. And the thing about doing things because you feel obliged, because you feel afraid, is that it always, 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 always leads to resentment and problems. And so you've got to start noticing the difference between desire and obligation. And the thing is, we know when we want to do something. And if we don't know, then that's only even a more of a clearer indicator about how much of our life is spent trying to please others. But like when you think about what you want to do versus what you feel obliged to do, if there's a difference between those two things, that's where the people pleasing lies. That's where the tension, friction, resentment, anxiety, and all the rest of those things reside. So once you start getting into the habit of noticing the difference between the two, you can then say to yourself, okay, can I get to a place of genuinely wanting to do this? Because when we do things from a conscious place, as opposed to this automated compliant response, we get to choose and we get to make healthier choices in response to that. And if we can't get to a place of actually wanting to, we need to say no. Or we need
Right.
to have a conversation with the person to either get more information and, to get clarity around whatever the ask is. And then if we don't still want to have that conversation, then it's definitely still a no. This leads neatly into cutting back on hinting. And so, all people please, like basically all people pleasing is hinting. It's like we're essentially trying to Jedi mind trick people into feeling and behaving differently by being pleasing. And so it's basically, people pleasing is indirect communication. It's around the houses way of going about saying, I need this, I want this. And instead it's like, hopefully you'll figure it out from all of this pleasing. And then we feel resentful. Cut back on the hinting. You're thinking that you're going 70% of the way and that the other person will do the rest of the legwork. No, we need to learn to be more direct. And when we are, we will see our people pleasing for what it is and realize where we're being, yes, sometimes manipulative with our pleasing. It's like, oh, let me do this good thing. And then hopefully you'll figure out what it is that I need and want. And you're going to feel obliged to do that. And then you're going to reward me. Stop. Like, we've got to stop doing this to ourselves. And then the last
Yes.
is really then to just, often when we experience challenges in our life, we see that as, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad person. I messed up. I didn't try hard enough, all those things. No, challenges are an opportunity for you to recognize where you need to start saying no so that you can figure out where you can say yes. Those challenges that come about because it's trying to show you what your boundaries are, trying to show you who you really are. And if you can start looking at them in that way, then they won't run you over so much. And it's also important to point out that when you people please, it's a matter of when, not if, you're going to erupt. So you're either going to explode and lose it with someone or a whole load of people. So you're just going to unleash on them, or you're going to implode, so break down within. So that's the burnout, the illness, the breakdown, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so it is a matter of when, not if. Rather than waiting to hit that point, learn to say no. Or if you have already hit those points, recognize it has not come about because of your failure as a person. It's come about from too much yes. And now you need to say no.
Yes. And that's why your book is called The Joy of Saying No.
Yeah.
So no, I so enjoyed our conversation, Natalie, and reading your book and learning. And like you said, this is how we grow. This is how we improve our lives and obviously the lives of those we're with, because it takes consciousness, it takes effort, and it just takes steps. You're not going to do this overnight, right? Like I'm recovering, but I can see definitely places in my life with people in particular who I know, where I'm being a people pleaser. So that's where I want to focus. I don't want to do this anymore, because it's like I'm going against my own self. So
yeah, and we have to recognize
it's not good.
we have to be patient and compassionate with ourselves. And
Right.
rather than being like, oh my God, I recognize my people pleaser. And then we want to just leap out of bed tomorrow morning and be like, thank you, Lord, I'm not a people pleaser anymore. Like, that's not real life. And so it didn't take us a hot minute to get into this. It's not going to take us an entire lifetime to like see any progress or change that a bit, but recognize this people pleasing is going to show up. The world socializes and conditions you to be a people pleaser. So of course it's going to show up. And
Right.
you spoke to it already. Use no as a way to grow your relationships, because when you are in a more honest place and you cut back on the people pleasing, you experience so much less anxiety, overwhelm, and all the rest. And instead, you get more intimacy, connection, love, care, trust, and respect. And that's always a good thing.
Yes. Well, I'm going to close our conversation with blessings that are based on everything we've just talked about and your work, Natalie. So may we learn that reparenting is about connecting with the younger aspects of ourselves that drive our pleaser, so that we can meet our needs, fill the voids, and stop trying to right the wrongs of the past. May we learn to speak our true feelings, allowing us to enter into more compassionate, honest, and present relationships with ourselves and others. And may we learn to find the joy in saying no.
Yes, Robin. That was beautiful.
Amen.
Amen. I was about to say, preach on it, Robin.
No, I so enjoyed our time, Natalie, and I look forward to doing the IG live and having our community interact with you, because it is a joy to talk to you and learn from you. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'll see you in Robin. What an amazing conversation. I look forward to chatting with you again in a little bit.